Alghashian. My name is Bilgehan Alagöz. I'm a faculty member at Marmara University and a senior expert at İRAM. And today we will focus on Syria's future through a regional perspective together with three distinguished speakers. First of all, I would like to thank all three speakers for accepting to be part of this panel, despite their busy schedules. Let me introduce the speakers briefly. Our first speaker is Mr. Oytun Orhan. He is the coordinator of Levant Studies at ORSAM. Oytun will be joining us from Ankara. With his extensive knowledge of Syria and the region, he will shed light on the priorities of Türkiye with regard to Syria, as well as the potential threats and opportunities identified by Türkiye. We are eager to hear his perspective on areas where cooperation might be possible. Our second speaker is Mr. Aziz Alghashian. He will be joining us from Riyadh. As a Saudi researcher affiliated with the Sectarianisation and De-sectarianisation project, Aziz will share Saudi Arabia's priorities concerning Syria, along with the threats and opportunities they perceive. It will be an interesting session to me to learn about the potential avenues for collaboration, particularly between Saudi Arabia and Türkiye. Last but not least, we are happy to have Mr. Marwan Alblooshi. He has an experience at Ministry of Foreign Affairs as a consultant. He is currently a PhD researcher at Lancaster University and a manager at KPMG. He is joining us all the way from Dubai. Marwan's extensive research on Emirates foreign policy will provide a unique perspective and show us the priorities, threats, and opportunities from the Emirates standpoint. Throughout this panel, we aim to dive into the future of Syria by exploring the areas of cooperation among countries in the region. The speakers will present their country's priorities regarding Syria, identify potential threats and opportunities, and highlight areas where they see cooperation with Türkiye as feasible. Each speaker will have 10 minutes to give their remarks. We will then continue with a Q&A session. So I will be happy if you actively participate our Q&A session with your burning questions. You can use the chat section of YouTube. Let us begin the discussion with Oytun. Oytun, thank you again for accepting to be part of this panel. I know how you are busy. I would like to learn your perspective about the ongoing situation in Syria. More than a decade has passed since the beginning of the conflict in Syria. Like many other countries, Turkey's Syria policy has changed. What do you think are Turkey's priorities in Syria? What are the threats and opportunities awaiting Turkey? And what are the opportunities for cooperation? I would be very grateful if you could also assess all this, including the developments in Deir ez-Zor in the recent weeks. You have 10 minutes, then we will continue in the Q&A session if our audience is interested in further details. Thank you. No. No, we can't hear.
Because
yes,
no, you can hear me now. I think the host muted myself, so sorry about that. You can hear me now. So it's a pleasure, Ms. Chairman, to be here. Thank you for the invitation and for the opportunity. In this very short time, I will try to briefly summarize the Turkish outlook towards the Syria crisis. Of course, as we have a very limited time, I would not go back to the first and second stage of the Syrian civil war, but I will try to focus on the current priorities of Turkey. And within my presentation, I will try to classify my presentation under three main topics. First of all, I will define the Turkish priorities, current Turkish priorities, and what Turkey is doing in order to pursue these priorities. And at the last part, I will try to also focus on the joint interest between Turkey and Gulf, and also cooperation possibilities between Turkey and Gulf in the Syria crisis. So starting with the Turkish priorities in Syria, of course, since this Syrian crisis had started, the Turkish priorities in Syria transport very critically, like everyone else, because the nature of the Syrian conflict has critically changed, and depending on the changing nature of the Syrian conflict, Turkey also transformed and also adapted itself to the new dynamics in Syria. At the first stage, Turkey was mainly focusing on pressuring the Assad regime to give up its rule, but then as the Syrian conflict had become a bloody civil war, Turkey, and also the rising radicalism and terror organizations in Syria, Turkey started to focus on the security threats originating from Syria, mainly YPG, the PKK terror organization's extension in Syria and territorial control in Syria. At the second stage, Turkish main priority, and I think these priorities are still valid, had changed rather than toppling the Assad regime. Mainly security dimension of the Syrian conflict has become on the fore, and depending on that, the first Turkish priority in Syria is fight against terrorism. The fight against terrorism in Syria has several dimensions. First of all, the YPG, as I mentioned, the PKK's extension. But other than that, ISIS and Al-Qaeda related organizations in Syria still is a threat to Turkish security. So we can sum up the fight against terrorism in Syria under three subtopics. But of course, YPG has a special position in this regard because Turkey has a very deep and rooted threat perception towards YPG. It is not a security issue for Turkey. It has the YPG issue is a strategic threat towards Turkey, because if this entity, this organization enables to establish a political status, to gain a political status in Syria, which it controls in the east of Euphrates River, this will create an existential threat towards Turkey, because it is considered as an extension of PKK, which Turkey is fighting since more than 40 years, since 1980s. And if this terrorist organization manages to gain a political status in Syria, this will mean that Turkey will be a neighbor of a terror organization on its southern border. So Turkey considers that this entity will have strategic threats towards Turkey, towards its territorial integrity and political unity in the long run. So this is not a security issue. And other than the armed structure of the organization, the civilian administration, the civilian setup of YPG in those regions will also be strategic towards Turkey, because all these education system and other civilian entities will try to raise a new Kurdish generation in Syria, which are fully against Turkey, which consider Turkey as a hostile entity. So in this regard, Turkey considers YPG issue as an existential threat. But apart from that, also ISIS and Al-Qaeda related organizations are threats towards Turkey. So in this regard, Euphrates Shield operation was conducted, and apart from that, in Idlib, there are still some Al-Qaeda related organizations which Turkey perceives as a threat. So fight against terrorism is one of main Turkish priorities in Syria. Secondly, preventing new refugee flows to Turkey. This is also a priority. Turkey is welcoming Syrians, that's for sure, but the number has reached to a critical level, and this is creating some social, economic burden on Turkey's shoulder. So in that regard, Turkey is trying to limit this flow And if possible, Turkey is trying to enable the voluntarily, this is very critical, voluntarily return of Syrians to Syria in order to lower the tension, lower the burden over Turkey's shoulder. Third priority is the border security. As Turkey applied open door policy, the Turkey-Syria border was not under control, but since 2013-14, Turkey is trying to control the border, Turkey-Syria border, in order to prevent refugee flows, in order to prevent foreign terrorist fighter flows. So in that regard, the border security issue is a critical issue in our Syria policy. And finally, finding a political solution to the Syrian crisis. Still, Turkey is asking for a fair political solution under and based on UN Resolution 2254. So still, Turkey is the guarantor of Syrian opposition against Syria Assad regime to find a political solution in Syria. So Turkey didn't give up its commitments, past commitments, although the security issues are more on the fore. So still, Turkey is supporting the Syrian opposition to find a political solution in Syria. And what Turkey is doing in order to pursue these priorities in Syria, at the first stage of the Syrian civil war, Turkey cooperated with West Gulf in order to push Assad regime to give up its rule, and then Turkey shifted its policy, depending on several reasons. Turkey is now engaging with Russia and also Iran to some extent to solve the Syrian crisis. And the main reasons are, first of all, the US and West, they lost their intention and they lost their interest and leverage and influence in Syria. They have nothing to do in Syria. And we can also include Gulf. The Gulf also withdrew its support to Syrian opposition, so Turkey was left alone in the Syrian crisis. I think that was the main reason. Secondly, the US, the West, not only US, but also Europe, started to supply and support YPG, PKK, which was a critical reason for Turkish policy shift. This pushed Turkey to turn to Russia. The YPG issue was very critical, mainly US support. And thirdly, Russia's success, I mean, in quotation, the Russian success in Syria to become a very important actor. So in order to do something in Syria, you need to engage with Russia. So depending on these reasons, Turkey initiated the Astana process and also coordinated its Syria policy with its rivals, actually in Syria, mainly Russia and Iran. And thanks to that policy, Turkey had found a solution and also got some advantage in its fight against terrorism, preventing refugee flows and establishing a safe corridor in the north of Syria. So this was a very useful policy for Turkey to pursue its priorities in Syria. So the Turkish presence in Syria and Turkish safe corridor in Syria and also Turkish engagement with its rivals in Syria, what it gave to Turkey. First of all, Turkey got very critical advantage in its fight against YPG. Turkey, the majority of the Turkey-Syria border is now under Turkish military's control. This gave Turkey border security, preventing refugee flows, because the new refugee flows are met not in Turkey but on the other side, so the numbers are not rising. And also we have an opportunity to send back some Syrians. I mean, of course, voluntarily some Syrians back to their homeland. So the numbers are slightly getting less and less. And also border security is very critical. And also we ended territorial control of YPG in some areas. So in that regard, the security threat perception from Syria is decreased, I should say. So this engagement with Russia and also with Iran enabled Turkey to get some advantage in its fight against YPG. And also this direct presence in Syria allows Turkey to have a say in the future of Syria. I mean, from a realistic perspective, as long as Turkey has influence in the north of Syria, Turkey is also very critical in the eyes of Assad regime and also Russia and Iran. So this gives Turkey a leverage and a say for the future of Syria, which strengthens our position in the political solution process. So our direct presence, Turkish direct presence in the northern Syria is very critical, and it is meaningless to ask Turkey to withdraw from Syria unless the Turkish demands and also the Turkish the security threats from northern Syria are fully eliminated. So this is how Turkey perceives its presence in the northern Syria. So in this context, what Turkey is doing to pursue its priorities, as I said, Astana process, and in the auspices of this process, Turkey initiated a dialogue process, not normalization, but a dialogue process with Assad regime. Since 2 years, first of all, intelligence agencies and then officials, defense ministers, and also foreign ministers met each other. There are several reasons for this dialogue process. First of all, the regional normalization, which Emirates and also Saudi Arabia are also part of it. So Turkey is also a part of it. This has enabled Turkey-Syria dialogue. But apart from that, Turkey feels that there are common interests between Ankara and Damascus, because Turkey is very sensitive about Syria's territorial integrity and political unity, similar to Assad. Assad is also very sensitive about that, of course. So in that regard, we feel that there is a joint interest in fight against YPG and also pushing US forces out of Syria. So in that regard, we initiated this dialogue. And secondly, of course, return of Syrians. Turkey thinks that in order to take some security guarantees for the Syrians to return their homeland, we need to engage with Assad. So in that regard, this dialogue process was very considered from Turkish mind, was very useful. And finally, a political solution, engaging with Assad could also help to find a midway, a common ground between the opposition forces and the Syrian regime. But it didn't work until now. Since a couple of months, we see some step backs in this regard. It's not working. And we can also say that it's not only valid for Turkey, but also other regional countries. There is a regional normalization process, and Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Emirates, and other countries are also disappointed with Assad regime's steps in this normalization process. They give recognition, a kind of legitimacy to Assad regime, but they cannot receive what they expect. For example, yesterday, Jordan's King Abdullah gave an interview in the US, and he said that, I'm not sure whether Assad regime is in power. And we were expecting Assad regime to prevent this, Captagon issue, to prevent the flow of these Captagon, but they didn't get any benefits in that regard. So this normalization process is not going well. The regional countries are not meeting their demands from the Assad regime. Similar to that, Turkey is facing with maximalist demands from the Assad regime. They ask Turkey to fully withdraw from Syria. But from Turkish point of view, as I mentioned before, the Turkish presence in Syria is existential, and without having real results on the ground, Turkish forces in Syria will not withdraw. And I think the Assad regime needs to be brought to a more realistic position. They consider themselves as the winner of the Syrian civil war, and today Syrian President Assad is in China. There's a normalization process in the region, and they consider themselves as the winner, and they don't feel that they need to make political concessions, but I think they need to be pushed to a more realistic position. And as I said, that Turkey does not feel itself big, so that it tries to reach Syria. I think Turkey thinks that there is a more suitable environment in the region to find a solution to the Syrian crisis. But if Assad regime is not, open to that dialogue, and also is still asking for maximalist demands, this normalization will not go further. Finally, what Turkey and Gulf can do together in Syria to the Syria crisis, we have similar.
I would like to interrupt, but can you be briefly?
Yes, it will be 1 or 2 minutes. I just realized that I'm already 5-10 minutes. Okay, I will be very brief. So what Turkey and Gulf can do together? First of all, the reconstruction of Syria. In any case, there will be a political solution. There will be a reconstruction of Syria. In this regard, I think Turkey and Gulf can cooperate together. But apart from that, bringing Assad regime to a more realistic level, I think Turkey and Gulf can work together. And as we see in the Deir ez-Zor conflicts, Assad regime is not in a very secure position. They are in trouble in Sueda, in the east of Euphrates River. There are also problems. And Saudi Arabia, Gulf, and others, Turkey has influence in those regions. So in order to push Assad regime to a more realistic level, Turkey and Gulf can cooperate. And finally, I think limiting and containing Iran in Syria could be a joint interest. I listed the terror organizations. The YPG, ISIS, Al-Qaeda. I didn't mention the Shia militias in Syria. Turkey does not consider those entities as terror organizations, but Turkey does not trust them. Turkey perceives threat from those entities. They are highly motivated, and they are highly ideological organizations. To some extent, they are also radical. So in that regard, Turkey tries to contain these organizations. And in some areas, these organizations are engaging with YPG. As we have seen in the olive branch operation in Idlib, Turkey also attacked and eliminated Hezbollah and other Shia militia organizations. So these are not terror organizations, but Turkey considers them as a security threat concern, at least. So in that regard, I think there is a cooperation possibility between Turkey and Gulf containing Iran and Iranian influence in Syria.
Thank you, Oytun. I will probably have questions in the Q&A session. This is a very enlightening presentation. I will go with Aziz. Aziz, thank you again for accepting to be part of this panel. Maybe we can start discussing the recent Iran-Saudi reconciliation, because to me one of the most important developments of this year for our region was the Iranian-Saudi reconciliation, and it was followed by the return of Syria to the Arab League with the consent of Saudi Arabia. And finally, at the G20 meeting, Prince Salman spoke of a new Arab era. It really attracted my attention. It gave me the feeling that Saudi Arabia is updating its Syria policy and all the Middle East policy. So can you briefly explain what Syria means for Saudi Arabia, and also is there still an Iran-Saudi rivalry in this region? And finally, how do you see the opportunities between Turkey and Saudi Arabia in terms of cooperation inside Syria? The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Bilgehan, and thank you to all in IRAM for facilitating this. I very much enjoy always having fruitful discussions with you all, and thank you all to just for the panelists for being for me sharing this panel with you. I think when it comes to Saudi Arabia, I'm glad that you started off with Iran, because I think looking at Syria, you cannot look at Iran, or you cannot avoid Iran. And I think this is the situation. Of course, for Saudi Arabia, the main security threat, the main security issue is with Iran. But I think over the years, there is a transformation. And I think the transformation was one from being a bit more not, I won't say colliding with Iran, but confrontation with Iran, now to more in the past few years, we've seen them with ever since I think 2019, the Alagöz attacks on the oil refineries, you start to see more of an engagement with Iran, or at least the intention of the engagement. And I think this is precisely why it's very important, because you cannot look at Saudi Arabia and not look at Saudi 2030 vision and its economy and its economic intention and outlook. And I think it realized that none of these things could be achieved, or I would say it's very limited potential, these economic objectives, in a very difficult region, or in a very turbulent region, in an unstable region. So you start to hear a lot of these people, a lot of the saying, the Saudi first. And for a particular time, I think a few years ago, Saudi first meant like that Saudi first was almost like Saudi alone, or we're doing things unilaterally in the region. And I think that perhaps changed and evolved from Saudi first, but it doesn't mean Saudi alone. So it's more engagement. And I think, so from that backdrop, from that background, we go into what is the aspect of Syria. And at the heart of Saudi Arabia's intention regarding Syria is really the stability of the region. Syria isn't just a small country in the Arab order, because there is an aspect here of order. This is what you alluded to what I think the Crown Prince said in this is the new Arab era, that there is an Arab order. And I think even in this extending of the hand to Iran from the Jeddah summit in 2022, they didn't do it alone. They did it almost in this kind of Arab bloc with the GCC plus. And so you see that there is an Arab unity element to addressing this issue. Now, here's the question: where does Syria fit into this? Syria is important, but what role does it play? I think just a few words on just the history of this relationship. And I think Syria did play a very important role in the Saudi-Iranian relations. I think under Hafez al-Assad, the father of the current president, the father of Bashar, Syria was a balancer. They knew how to balance between its relations with Iran, its kind of anti-American axis almost, and its Arabness and this Arab identity and its relations with the Gulf. Of course, being a supplier and resources, there was a lot, and diplomacy. And you see this, for example, in the Gulf War. You see this even in the years prior. There was a very strategic relations. Now, from the death of Hafez al-Assad, it began almost cordially with Bashar al-Assad, but immediately the dynamics of the Saudi-Syrian relationship changed. It changed because, firstly, the Iraqi invasion of of 2003. It made, because I think anybody that remembered that and remembered the rhetoric of the American administration, and a very shooting from the hip kind of style that they had in the Middle East, the Bush administration, they were always saying that Syria is next. Syria is going to be next, and we're going to go and we're preparing ourselves for Syria. And of course, a lot of the forces were coming from the Gulf. So it changed that perception of the Gulf. And what is this? This is now part of this American kind of base. And this was the Syrian perception. Of course, the United States got bogged down there. But I think the assassination of Rafiq al-Hariri changed a lot of things. And I think when it changed it, it really began to hurt the Saudi-Syrian relationship. And then followed by, for example, the 2006 war, where relations were cut. And the point that I'm trying to say is that the Syria under Bashar al-Assad, leading up to the Arab Spring, was very much in viewing things and viewing kind of being aligned with Iran against this kind of Western access. And when the Arab Spring happened, of course, we don't need to rehash that time and again. But so why is this now currently important? I think why it's important is that and what Saudi Arabia fundamentally wants, the function of Syria and in this Arab order, is not to balance between Syria and Iran and Saudi Arabia. I think it's to say, listen, don't be too much on the Iranian side. Or you could be on the Iranian side, but listen, don't hinder what we are trying to do here. And it's more of of saying, just don't try to obstruct what we are trying to do in the Arab order. And you could actually have a piece of the pie as well. And so therefore, this is the position. It's more of just saying, listen, this is, we don't want you to be too much on one side. We don't want you to be too disruptive. And that's the overarching objective of this, the regional approach to this, or the regional logic for Saudi Arabia and normalizing relations with Syria. Now, when it comes to but there are other things when it comes to the security aspects. Of course, the drug issue, Captagon, this is something that, anybody that's in Saudi Arabia now sees everywhere. You see checkpoints. There's always an anti-drug campaign, anti-narcotics campaign. It's very, very intense. And the source from Syria being this corridor now to being the source of this is an issue. And it requires kind of more of addressing this issue. Of course, I think Assad this is going to be a difficult thing, because that's really where Assad's funds are coming from. The wealth is coming from, and I don't think he's going to let that go easily. So there is an aspect of Saudi-Turkish relations and where they could use to incentivize this and try to perhaps co-opt Syria into this a new way of thinking. But I'm sorry, just before I go on to the terrorism, I think it's very difficult to see this. It's easier to say we could cooperate here, and I think everybody knows this. It's a lot easier said than done. I think everybody would agree with this. And the reason being is because maybe there was too much emphasis on Iran, that Bashar said, listen, and this is what he said in the Arab League summit in Riyadh. He said, don't think you're going to take me away from we're back into the Arab fold, that I go back to the Arab fold easily, or I go back. Folds change. I could one time go to Iran. I could one time go here. Don't think, in other words, don't think you won me over there, and I think what he's trying to do is he's trying to prove a Syrian agency, a Bashar, and more importantly, not a Syrian agency, an Assad regime agency. that we are not just part of Iran. Just because Saudi Arabia and Iran made a deal doesn't mean I'm going to follow suit immediately. I'm not a proxy. So hence you see this intentional complication of this normalization to show that, man, okay, it looks like Assad isn't really going, what's going on here? He has his own logic. So this is something to really take into account also. So, but from the drugs to, I think, the terrorism. And this is where I think it's really difficult, because you can't remove Assad. That attempt wasn't successful. But at the same time, if you're going to remove him, who are you going to supplement it? Who are you going to replace him with? And that process led to, unfortunately, a lot of security vacuums. And there's terrorism. And right now, what is taking place is that, this is also one of the first things that Saudi Arabia and Turkey cooperated on was also combating terrorism there. ISIS was putting Saudi and others at the very forefront of their targets. And therefore, so in order to combat terrorism, in order to harmonize regional efforts, whether be it from Turkey, whether be it from Saudi, whether be it's all the Gulf or the Arab League or etc. or others, who does Saudi Arabia, who do they work with? And therefore there needs to be this entity. And that was also part of the calculation. But again, this goes back to another complex issue of, to what extent some terrorist elements for others, it's difficult. I mean, terrorism is such there's so many dimensions to terrorism there that it becomes, it hinders a unified approach, because for some people, they're the people to support, others are not. So, but I think looking into the future, Saudi Arabia has an intention of at least doing two things: stopping a spillover effect and stopping a spill-in effect. Two main effects, two main processes. And the spillover effect is basically what we're seeing with drugs now. Something's happening there. It leads to the region. It leads to Saudi Arabia. If there's a terrorism base there, like what either be it Al-Qaeda or ISIS, they could then start to be a source of exporting their ideas, emboldening lone wolves here. Who knows? It's sending soldiers, if you like, whatever that may be. That spillover effect is difficult. There's also the spilling in effect, which is, I think, very also in the same side of the coin, which is they don't want to see what happened in ISIS in the beginning of 2000 in the Arab Spring, which is some of these Saudis that went there. They were very impressionable, and not just from Saudi Arabia, from all over the world. So this aspect of security vacuum, Saudi Arabia now looks at the region and it just wants to eliminate all security vacuums. The biggest threat for Saudi Arabia is not, in my opinion, very ideological, and it's more rational now. And basically it's saying that, okay, security threats or potential sources of instability is the main issue that we have to address. And I think this leads then to the next point about terrorism and ISIS and what I think Saudi Arabia and Turkey can work on. And given the histories that we both have, the Islamic histories and the traditions, I think there is space for a soft power cooperation, a space where we could cooperate on a moderate form of Islam, a form of Islam that is not something that will embolden radicals, and basically be, I don't want to use it as instrumental, I mean, as a security instrument exclusively, but this is because it has, broader issues also. It makes, it brings people together. It's better for social cohesion, etc. But I think from the aspect of security, soft power, of a moderate Islam is something that we could cooperate on. I think this is an issue that is, I think, long overdue. There is a lot of potential for it, and it will not just only address the issue of Syria. It will also be a process where it could help on the, to be precise, not just the people-to-people level, but maybe the scholar-to-scholar level, maybe the sheikh-to-sheikh level, maybe the imam-to-imam level, because we are here in Saudi Arabia. We are saying, okay, we're looking for a more moderate Islam. We're looking for a more of this, and perhaps an Islam that's depoliticized. And I think this is the issue. This is because this is the Saudi problem, or the Saudi anxiety that it has in working perhaps with Turkey, is that there is this political Islam, the legacy of the Muslim Brotherhood, etc. And I think this could help combating using the soft power element, because does not only work in Syria, it could be even broader. And I mean, alongside issues of containing militias and just stopping them and reconstruction. So I echo everything that Oytun mentioned, but I think that's, for me, I don't want to take any more time because I know there's great experts and I'm sure there's fantastic questions. So I think I'll keep it there. I think I'm proud of myself because for the first time, maybe I finished less on time, or almost on time.
Yeah, you really did well. The timing is perfect. So I will go in details in the Q&A session. Thank you, Aziz. I will continue with Marwan because the Emirates foreign policy is very much highlighted in the recent years. Now, Emirates is an influential actor both in regional politics and economics. But while it took an active position in the early years of the Syrian crisis, it then remained in the background in the following years. So there has been a shift in the Emirates' approach towards Syria. But currently, once again, Emirates is very much highlighted in the international circles in terms of the reconstruction of Syria. So I really would like to hear from you, Marwan. What does Syria mean for the Emirates, and will the Emirates be an active investor in the reconstruction of Syria? And is Emirates open to cooperation with Turkey in any terms, whether it is in reconstruction, in terms of economics or political processes? Again, you have around 10 minutes, so the floor is yours.
Yeah, you can listen. Yeah. So thank you again for hosting me, and thank you, Oytun and Aziz, for your contributions. Commenting on the points you raised, Bilgehan, I think it would be fair to frame the Emirati foreign policy in the last 2 years within, an understanding that would consider the shifts and changes that this particular foreign policy went through. So after a decade of interventionism, of aggressive activism throughout the region, the UAE now is adopting a policy of restraint and focusing onto the economy, or shall I say the statecraft of geoeconomics. Of course, this might be, or this might have came as a bit of a surprise to lots of people, but one would argue that it is also a bit in sync with the identity of the country. Now, let me here be clear. there were some changes from 2019 in the drivers and at the substance and the performance of the UAE's foreign policy. But the way the UAE looks at Syria hasn't changed much, because for us in the UAE, we believe in dealing with Syria, the government, the regime, whether we like the regime or not, which is, of course, one of the pillars of the UAE's foreign policy that hasn't, changed throughout the last decade. So this is regarding the point you raised about how we look at Syria. Now, it hasn't changed the way we look at Syria, but the way we look at Turkey's role in Syria has changed, because the way we look at Turkey, our perception around Turkey's role in our region has changed. So after the cooling down, or shall I say the normalization between Ankara and Abu Dhabi, things has changed, and as the UAE's ex-foreign minister and the grand strategist of our policy, Dr. Anwar Gargash, said, what we want to achieve with Turkey, of course, with Turkey, alongside Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and possibly Iran, is a different kind of a Middle Eastern order that would shift from being a polarized, multipolar one into a networked Middle Eastern order. And talking with Emirati official, when it comes to Syria and when it comes to working with the Turks around, around solving many of Syria's pain point and moving on to a different future, the Emirates or the Emirati focus right now has been narrowed on economics, on reconstruction. So aside from saving the Syrian state, which is so important to us, because dealing with states, not non-state actors, and focusing onto improving governance versus political change, or shall I say democratic transition. These focus points are so important to the UAE, and we would like to work with the Turks on serving the Syrian state in Syria, and also work with them onto improving what's happening in terms of governance in the grounds in Syria, basic services, things like things that ordinary Syrian citizens lack at the moment, stabilization of the markets, and of course, when it comes to the free flow of capital, of finance, of ideas, energy, goods. This is all important to us. So it's important to see that geo-economic statecraft is now the lenses, is now the guiding principle of the UAE throughout the region. And actually, when it comes to Syria, we are starting to see the effects of that. So, as you may know, Damascus will host an Arab energy conference in 2024, I think, at the first quarter of next year, which is of course comes in sync with the COP28, which is will be hosted by us, in 2 months' time. And that Arab Energy Conference that is hosted in Syria, is hosted with the full, financial, diplomatic, and media support of the UAE. So so Emirati normalization backing up of the Assad regime has gone for a number of years, and these efforts has intensified in the last couple of years, in the hope that these efforts will help in shifting or changing the nature of the regional order. So for us, it's not about bringing Syria back into the Arab fold. No, it's a bigger aim out there. It might be a bit idealistic, but it's about changing the nature of how we as states cohabit this region. And of course, Turkey has a role in that. And Abdulaziz mentioned, a possible, cross sharing of soft power ideas, strategies between the Turks and the Saudis, which is of course amazing for us. But and good news, it's music to our ears. So yeah, I mean, we would love to work with the Turks, and Syria is a sort of a laboratory where we can see if this new shift in Emirati foreign policy is working or not. I'll take a pause, and thank you again for hosting me.
Oh, thank you, Marwan. You are very brief using the time. So at this part of the session, I can continue with the Q&A. I check the audience whether there is any question or not. Just a minute. There isn't any question from the audience, but I have questions for each of you. As you know, we are a Center for Iranian Studies, so our main focus is Iranian politics. And while talking about Syria, it is not possible to skip Iran. And Oytun, my first question is for you. Iran defines Syria as part of its axis of resistance along with Iraq. So we all know that Syria is vital for Iranian foreign policy. But in the recent years, the Iran-China relationship is deepening, and even inside Iraq and Syria, we see more involvement of China. I think today Assad meets with the Chinese president, if I'm not wrong. So the relationship with China is very influential for Iranian foreign policy. How do you evaluate China's involvement in Syria, and is it possible to interpret current Iranian foreign policy as part of the grand policy of China's involvement in the Middle East? Because Syria is also a member of the Belt and Road project. So is there any proxy relationship with Iran and China inside Syria?
Okay. Yeah, first of all, what Syria means for China, I think there are several priorities for China. It is important in the context of One Belt, One Road project, because it's not a direct part of this project, but it can export instability or stability. It can benefit this project or this undermine the project. The Syria conflict in this regard is very crucial for China. Reconstruction process is also another priority for China. Since now we don't see a very high and clear China investment in Syria, but there are some Chinese footprints in some Syrian economic sectors. So economic aspect is also another priority, and China is also trying to have a lion's share in the reconstruction process. And now we see that China is trying to be influential in the Syrian communications sector and also mining sector. So there are preparations from China to have a lion's share. But apart from that, from a security perspective, of course, the Uyghur fighters based in Idlib is a priority for China. They consider those fighters, which are part of Al-Qaeda organization, as a threat to China security. So in that regard, China is trying to monitor the situation in Idlib and also try to follow the Uyghur fighters, foreign fighters in Syria, which could be a threat to China in the long run. So these are the main priorities for China. Since the beginning of the uprising, China didn't apply a very clear policy, seemed to be in between, didn't take a very clear position. But everyone is aware that China is with the Assad regime, so they gave some economic benefits. They also gave military support to Assad. Although they are trying to take a more balanced position in the Syrian conflict, they are more on the Assad side. And today's visit, you are right, Assad is now in China, in Beijing, and this is also a clear sign of China's support to Syria. And in China's Middle East policy, as they are not highly engaged with the Middle East and they do not have a long history there, they are trying to have some allies in the region to reach some countries, like in Iraq and also in Syria. And Iran is a very beneficial country for them. For example, in Iraq, they don't have proxies or they don't have a direct leverage in this country. But Iran, as they have a clear leverage in Iraq, Iran is facilitating the Chinese activities in Iraq. Similar to that, China could be also another area of cooperation between Iran and China. Iran, whether you like it or not, is very influential in Syria. So China, depending on their cooperation with Iran, long-term engagement with Iran, they are using this cooperation to have a say in the future of Syria. So this is what they are doing. But as I said, China is trying to position themselves in between. They don't want to take a clear position. This is general China policy, as we all very well know, that China don't take clear position in such conflicts. They don't take direct part in such conflicts, but they use indirect ways to influence. So this is, I think, how China perceives the Syria and Syria conflict.
Thank you. Let's continue our current Iranian politics. Aziz, yesterday in the United States, there has been very interesting explanations from the Saudi officials. There was a question in a TV show, and the explanation, if I am not wrong, regarding the Iran nuclear program, Saudis explained that if Iran goes into nuclear, we will eventually go into nuclear. We will develop our nuclear systems. So while talking about Iran-Saudi reconciliation, this gave me the reflection that still there is a rivalry between Iran and Saudi Arabia. There isn't an end to this historical rivalry. And at the beginning of your speech, you mentioned that when we look at Syria, we cannot skip Iran as the Saudis. So if Iran continues to develop its nuclear program and goes into nuclear arming, what will be the implications of this new phase on Saudi's perspective towards Syria? Maybe we can go with this.
Yeah, thank you. I think just to mention to expand upon what you said is that it doesn't seem there's no end to the rivalry between Saudi Arabia and Iran. And I think this is accurate, but it's the way in which they deal with this rivalry. I think that it has changed, and I think Saudi is making an investment for the future. Personally, this is what I think: is that listen, we don't have to enter into a transactional process, an overly transactional process, because I think, let us begin this new era and just have a bit of faith in each other with some incentives. And that's what he also mentioned yesterday, the Crown Prince, about this, is that, if it makes sense for us and then this relationship, we could have economic relations and it will be better. Again, so it speaks to this economic-driven foreign policy that Saudi Arabia is having. However, there was this issue of the nuclear question. What happens if Iran goes nuclear? And I think, quite frankly, yesterday's position of the Crown Prince was a very consistent Saudi position, and it was a very expected one also. I mean, they have to say this. And not only do they have to say this, they have to do this. And they have to say that they're going to do this for two main reasons. Firstly, it's just to maintain this balance of power. It has to maintain this aspect of balance of power, and it tries to project this balancing right now. But also, I think there's also another element to this. And I think that's why the Saudi ruling elite, and yesterday the Crown Prince mentioned that they will have no hesitation, basically, of going nuclear, because we're now talking about a nuclear proliferation of the region. And this is something that is not in anybody's favor, but really not in Israel's favor. And if it's not in Israel's favor, that means that the United States, obviously, this is going to be something that the United States is going to care about deeply. So there was a duality, a multifaceted kind of messages sent by the Crown Prince yesterday, that he has to say this. And firstly, it was this position. Secondly, it was really a message also to say, listen, well, you clearly don't like it, so you have to do something about it to reach a good deal in order to stop it. And there's a third aspect. You probably know, I always say this a lot. I say, secondly, and I'm probably on my fifth point, but I always say this. So, but the third point is that I think the Saudis seen the immense amount of leverage nuclear weapons, or the threat of nuclear weapons, can have diplomatically and in negotiations. And I think they've seen how Iran plays this card and is willing really to get people onto the table, to get the superpowers really to the table, by just simply not even using the nuclear weapons, by just using the potential of nuclear weapons. So here there's a multifaceted aspect of negotiation as well. And in my opinion, allow me to be a little bit provocative. In my opinion, I think the Saudi perception is not necessarily an Iran with nuclear weapons, or any other country. It's a country or an Iran that has a lot of funds to fuel its supporters and some of its proxies or some of its partners around the region. And what a nuclear deal would enable that kind of funds. So in exchange for not a nuclear weapon, just like going back into the JCPOA, it wasn't a good deal because of that. It didn't address that point. And that was the main issue. If you're going to have nuclear weapons, we could go look to what Brody was saying, that nuclear weapons, they cancel each other out, and then as a result, it trickles, the conflict trickles down again to more of what we see. And I think when it comes to Syria, this is where I think that it can be amplified. It is the funds that enables Iranian partners. It will be funds that will not really enable Syria. Syria, while it is the main topic, Syria will be a sphere of this. But really, I think for Saudi Arabia, it's also Yemen. The main issue is Yemen. So this is the issue. This is how I think the intricacies and the dynamics of a nuclear weapon, and that's why, I'll be honest, I personally believe Saudi does not want to see nuclear weapons anywhere in the region. This is what I personally see, because I just don't see it. But Saudi is more of a status quo kind of state. If it gets it because of a reaction, not a proactivity. And but it's very clear. And I think because, just like what Marwan said, well, Israel has nuclear capabilities. That's the only kind of country that it has there. So a nuclear Iran and nuclear Saudi and a nuclear Israel, goodness me, there's a lot of nukes in the region. So it's going to be a very testy situation, but also it will complicate regional negotiations. This is what I also think, is because now I don't see them as military, powers. I see them more as diplomatic instruments. Okay, you don't like this, so I'll position this, and and so I'll enrich your uranium to this level. I'll do, and so it's another sphere of just, it's another aspect of diplomacy that's being played. I'll be quiet.
Thank you, Aziz. I totally agree with you. The nuclear proliferation for our region is not something that we desire. So a regional dialogue, all these normalization processes are, I think, the concrete steps for preventing this kind of proliferation. So I really appreciate the Saudi effort in all these normalization processes, especially regarding its approach towards Iran. So Marwan, my question is about the Emirates-Iran relations. Iran was very critical about the Abraham Accords because of the Emirates' engagement with the Israel. But on the other hand, I also see a new dialogue between Iran and Emirates. So should we interpret this as a distance with Israel, or as a balance in the region? I mean, how do you evaluate the Emirates-Iranian relations while having these Abraham Accords on the table? The microphone is off.
Yes.
Okay.
So going back to what Emirati officials say about this triangulation between the UAE, Israel, and Iran, the relationship with Iran is always, or has always been one of ongoing paradoxes. So at the one hand, we have a very good trading relationship with them, but on the security front, there are tensions. And some of these tensions also, extend to Iran occupying Emirati lands. But anyways, when it comes to Syria, lots of people don't get that the Emirati position regarding the Syrian revolution / the Syrian civil war since the very beginning at 2011 was, I would say, the UAE was a bit neutral, or was not as as was not driving towards the removal of the Assad regime like Qatar or Saudi Arabia at the very beginning. And of course, we knew that there is a very good rationale behind what other GCC countries were doing in Syria, because you want to remove a pillar of Iranian influence in the Levant, which was be good, to cut down Iran in size. But Sheikh Abdullah bin Zayed, the Emirati foreign minister back then, said that the decision to suspend Syria's membership in 2011 is hasty and will contribute to the complexity of the situation in Syria. And of course, off the record, when you talk to Emirati officials, they would say that, of course, we don't like to see Iranian influence in 4 or 5 or 6, or I don't know what's the number now, Arab capitals, but sometimes sometimes we got to be a bit pragmatic when it comes to dealing with the Iranian influence in the Arab order. So we might keep our criticism of the connection between Iran and Syria a bit low key until we can until we gave the Assad regime, the Assad government, the opportunity to come back to the Arab fold, and of course to diversify his sources or his opportunities of reintegrating himself into the economic order. So I would say, when it comes to Syria and the UAE and Iran, we fully understand that it would be so hard to cancel out Syrian agency, as Aziz said. But it's also, we are playing the long game. As a friend of mine in the Emirati Foreign Ministry said, we can't right now ask Assad or push Assad towards putting aside his Iranian connections, but we can also help him in diversifying his sources of support and access to the international order. So this is the Emirati strategy towards I don't know what's the right word, nullifying Iranian presence in Syria, or perhaps reducing the Iranian footprint in Syria. But it's a long it's a work in progress, and we won't see the end of it in this decade, I think. So that's it.
Can I just go in? please?
Sure. Yeah.
Because I think your question about, I think you asked a very fascinating question about UAE, Abraham Accords in Syria and the triangulation. And if you don't mind, Marwan, maybe I could speak a little about this, and he could correct me if I'm wrong. But I think this triangulation is also seen in the Saudi front of Saudi Arabia, Israel, and Iran. And I think too many people have assumed that the reason why there's normalization, or currently, so we've seen in the statement yesterday that we're getting closer to normalization, that made by the Crown Prince, or the Abraham Accords. A lot of people assume that this is perhaps the main driving force was Iran, and I don't think it was. I think the main driving force of either normalization with Israel was far more economic than it was about meeting the Iranian threat. And that, because I don't think this is the way either GCC states, respectively, and Saudi Arabia confront Iran. They've already tried to confront Iran and it didn't work. And this was I would say this aspect of from 2014, I won't say 2014, from the Arab Spring, I would also consider it as an exploratory phase in Saudi and in GCC foreign policy, and especially from Saudi. Marwan could speak, of course, far more authoritatively about the UAE, but I think they foregone that dependence on the United States, that reaction of what is the United States going to do? Now we'll do it. They saw this hesitation. The region now, they said, listen, they've amplified, and the binaries, as Oytun mentioned earlier, was very much amplified. And therefore, this confrontation began. And I think if there is a clear-cut military access between the GCC states, Israel, this will only amplify their security threats, not deal with it. So it will go against the very logic. Now, Israel has tried to do this, has tried to frame either the Abraham Accords in that way, has tried to constantly use the Iran issue. They also use the Syrian issue there of saying, hey, there's a lot of security tech, we need to work together. But that wasn't the thing that was driving the relations. And just one last point of the Jeddah Summit. The Jeddah Summit of last year, 2022, was very fascinating because, and Marwan could correct me if I'm wrong, but there was the idea that Biden was going to go to Jeddah, and then we might get normalization. And then they said, okay, normalization might not be on the records, on the cards, but an anti-air defense alliance. How about an anti-defense alliance? So anything that attacks Israel means it attacks the GCC as well. And I think, and this is where the UAE sent someone to Iran and to say, we have no intention of doing anything like this. And so therefore, this idea that the Israel element, when it comes to Gulf in Iran, the GCC respectively in Iran, I think Iran is viewed too much and given too much emphasis on this in aspects of cooperation. There is cooperation on maybe on the soft aspect, on the intelligence aspect, on the technological aspect. Don't think on the hard aspect. There are some, and I'll just be quiet.
Mm-hmm.
If I may comment on the point very briefly made by Aziz, I would say that nowadays we hear a lot about simmering tensions between the UAE and Saudi Arabia, in the background. But aside from this topic, which is very fascinating, because there might be some differences, but for me, as a citizen of the region, of our region, and obviously the GCC. It's a happy incident that these two countries can manage very effectively their differences. But to go back to Aziz's point, I would say it seems to me that the GCC, of course, the two main drivers in it, Saudi Arabia and Iran, reached the conclusion that, you know what, let's give economic statecraft the power now to drive forward our agenda, and let's bite out the bullet, the security when it comes to the security front, and wait out. I don't know if this will be effective in the long term, because other countries historically that tried to do so didn't get a very satisfactory return on investment when they prioritized economic statecraft, instead of guaranteeing their security. But let's wait and see.
Okay, I really appreciate your comments. It was a very fruitful panel for me. I wouldn't want to end this session because the topic is very attractive to me, but we have had a limited time, so I here have to end up our panel. But maybe in the near future, we can continue our discussion with the follow-up topics. Once again, thank you for being part of this panel. I really benefited what you have all said in the panel. And if you don't have any word to add, I will end the session at this point. Oytun, would you like to add anything? Okay. So, and I would like to thank our audience for following our panel. You can visit for our work through our website, IRAM.org is our, IRAMcenter.org is our website. Once again, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Great pleasure to join you.
See you. Bye.